For 70 years, my table has been set for a dinner guest who never arrived, and tonight, child, I'm finally going to tell you why. You see that chair? The one at the far end, with the cushion your great-grandmother crocheted and the plate that no one dares to touch. We polish its silver, we pour its water, we fold its napkin into a neat little fan. And we all pretend it's normal to feed a ghost. Every holiday, every birthday, every gathering that matters, we leave that place empty. When you were small, you asked me, "Grandma, who is that for?" And I told you what I had been told. It's for the dinner guest who never arrived. But no one ever explained what that really meant. Was it a story? A warning? A superstition to scare children into coming home on time? Or was it something worse, a wound so deep the whole family agreed to pretend it was a legend? Tonight, I'm going to tell you everything. Who that guest was supposed to be. Why they never took that seat. And how the empty space they left behind shaped every life that came after. Including yours, and mine. Because an empty chair is never just furniture. It's a question that no one wanted to answer. Until someone finally decided to. Let me take you back to the first time I noticed that chair. I was 6 years old, small enough that the edge of the table was just at my nose. The house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary, like yeast rolls and sugared carrots. The big chandelier hummed faintly, and every glass sparkled with candlelight. Your great-grandfather sat at one end, stiff and quiet, his hands folded on the tablecloth. Your great-grandmother moved around like a slow, practiced breeze, topping off glasses, straightening forks that were already straight. My older brothers were kicking each other under the table. Someone put on a record in the living room, a scratchy old waltz. And at the far end of that long white tablecloth was a chair no one sat in. The plate in front of it was as perfect as a photograph, knife and fork exactly aligned, a sprig of parsley on the folded napkin, a glass already beaded with condensation. I remember whispering, "Who sits there?" My mother's hand went to her necklace. She always did that when something hurt. "That," she said softly, "is for the one who never came." I thought it was a fairy tale. Children love stories of ghosts and almosts. So I asked, "Did he get lost?" "Eat your potatoes," my father said, a little too fast. Have you ever seen grown-ups dodge a question as if it might explode on the table? That's how it felt. Looking back, I realize a 6-year-old had stumbled onto a landmine. Over the years, the story was passed to me in whispers and fragments. Like bits of broken china found in the garden. Your great-uncle Henry said, he missed the train. Your Aunt May said, no, it was a storm. The roads washed out. One cousin swore the guest had run away with a lover at the last minute. Another insisted he'd never existed at all. That the empty chair was a piece of family theater, a reminder not to take each other for granted. It was always he, never a name. Never a face. Just the guest. Funny, isn't it? You can trace a whole family tree, branches and births and deaths, and still find a blank space no one wants to label. As I grew older, I learned the rule. You could ask about the war. You could ask about the factory strike, the house fire, the year the well went dry. But you could not ask too much about the dinner guest who never arrived. If you pressed, someone changed the subject. If you wondered aloud at the table, your questions fell to the floor like dropped forks. Have you ever felt a room tighten, even when nobody moves? That's what happened whenever that chair was mentioned. So the empty place became a kind of shadow in my childhood. Always there in the corner of my eye. Always waiting. Years passed. My legs got longer, my dresses got shorter, my curiosity got sharper. Teenagers are dangerous creatures. We think every secret is meant for us. By the time I was 16, I'd decided I would solve it. I'd solve it because no one else seemed brave, or foolish, enough to try. Why would a family carry an empty chair across decades, like a suitcase full of air? Why polish a fork that no one ever lifts? What promise were they keeping, and to whom? On quiet afternoons, when the house was napping, I started climbing into the attic. The attic smelled like dry paper and old cedar. The floorboards complained under my feet. Trunks lined the walls like sleeping animals. I went through them one by one. There were baby shoes tied together with string, folded wedding dresses yellowed with time, bundles of letters bound with brittle ribbon. I learned our history not from the stories my elders told at the table, but from the ink they forgot they'd left behind. I found love letters from your great-grandfather to your great-grandmother, written when they were still courting. He was shy in person but bold on paper. His letterhead was from a lumber mill 2 towns over. I never knew he'd lived anywhere but here. I found a newspaper clipping about a cousin who died in a factory accident. I found a church program with the name of a baby that didn't appear on any family chart I'd ever seen. But I did not find the guest. Isn't it strange how sometimes the thing you cannot find begins to feel bigger than everything you can? One rainy day, I opened an old, narrow box I'd never noticed before. It had slipped behind a stack of hatboxes, nearly invisible. The cardboard was soft, its edges melted from years and damp. Inside, wrapped in tissue, I found a tablecloth. It was white once, I think, with an edge of blue embroidery. Tiny flowers and 2 initials, interlinked, M and T. M for Margaret, my great-grandmother. I knew her name from the photo that hung in the hallway, the woman with the serious eyes and the lace collar. But T? No one in our family starts with T, I thought. At least, not anyone ever invited to dinner. I brushed my fingers over those letters. They felt like dried tears. Why would my great-grandmother embroider someone's initial beside her own? And then never once speak their name at the table? I folded the cloth and took it downstairs. Mom, I called into the kitchen. Who's T? She was standing at the counter, slicing carrots. Her knife paused midair. What do you mean? On the old tablecloth. It says M and T. She looked at me, then at the clock, then at the sink, everywhere but at that cloth. That's old, she said. Put it back before you stain it. Is it for the guest? I asked. The question hung between us like steam. Finally, she said, very quietly. Some stories don't belong to us, Nora. Put it back. Have you ever been told that, child? That a story in your own blood isn't yours to know? I put the cloth away. But I did not put the question away. The years rolled on like marbles down a slope. I graduated, I fell in love, I had my heart broken because he was all wrong for me. Too restless, too poor, too unlike what my parents imagined for their daughter. So I chose a different man, a safer man, the way your great-grandmother had chosen your great-grandfather. I told myself this was maturity. But a little voice in me whispered that maybe it was just fear. At every big dinner, the chair remained. Sometimes I would catch my father staring at it, his jaw tight, his fork untouched. Sometimes I would see my mother refill its glass without even looking, hand moving from habit more than thought. Who are you? I would wonder, silently. What did you do to all of us from so far away? Because by then I had begun to feel it. The way our whole family lived around an invisible outline. No one left for too long. No one married too wildly. No one chose a path that might lead them too far from home. If we ever wondered why, someone would joke. We're not losing another one. Another what? Another who? The empty chair had become a border. A warning sign. A little gravestone we set a plate on. When your great-grandparents passed, within a winter of each other, something in the air of this house changed. Their rooms were suddenly just rooms. Their letters, their keepsakes, their secrets. They were all just things in drawers now, waiting for someone to decide what mattered. I was middle-aged by then. You were just a baby. I had less patience for silence and more hunger for truth. What good had it done us, all this not knowing? Had it made us kinder? Safer? Or only smaller? So one evening, after the funeral guests had gone and the casseroles were wrapped, I poured myself a cup of tea and spread the papers from the attic across this very table. Birth certificates. Marriage licenses. Old invitations, brittle with age. On one card, the ink had bled almost away. But I could just make out the words. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Hale request the honor of your presence at a family dinner. On the evening of March 10, 1924, at 7 o'clock. My heart gave a little jump. Our family name. Our address. Our tradition of family dinner, older than anyone sitting at my table now. And at the bottom, in a more hurried hand, a scribble that took me 3 tries to decipher. Please, Thomas. Come home. Thomas. T. The letter on the tablecloth. Have you ever seen a puzzle piece slide into place so neatly it makes the past rearrange itself in your head? I found his name again in a small, folded paper tucked inside the same box. Thomas Hale, it said. Born 1895. Then, on another line, in a different, darker ink. Removed from family records, 1920. Removed. Not deceased. Not departed. Removed. Who removes a person from a family? A priest? A judge? A father with a pen? There was no photograph with his name. Just a blank outline where his life should have been. I knew, then, that this wasn't just a forgotten cousin or a late dinner guest. This was someone they had buried in pencil. And pencil can be erased. Or rewritten. That night I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the old house settle, wondering what else it was hiding. And in the morning, I did something no one in this family had ever done about that chair. I went looking for answers outside our own walls. The library in town was small, but the local history room was well kept. Old ledgers, town council minutes, newspaper reels, family histories in plastic sleeves. The town had done a better job of remembering us than we had done of remembering ourselves. Behind the desk sat a woman with silver hair pinned in a bun, glasses resting at the end of her nose. Her name was Ellen, and she knew more about this town than the sidewalks did. I'm looking for someone, I said. Thomas Hale. Born 1895. I think he might have been my great-uncle. She pursed her lips and tapped something into her computer. Her eyes brightened. Ah. The Hales. You folks have been here a long time. She pulled out a bound volume of newspaper clippings and laid it gently on the table. Her fingers turned pages with the same care my grandmother used on pie crusts. There are a few mentions, she said. Let's see. There he was. Name in crisp black ink. Thomas Hale, local boy, enlists. Private Thomas Hale returns from service. Photos, too, grainy, but clear enough. A young man with the Hale jaw and the Hale eyes. He looked a little like your father. My breath caught. He was no ghost. He had stood in this town, walked these streets, worn that face. Any more? I asked. Ellen turned another page. There's a notice here. 1920, something about a disruption at the Hale family store. She tilted her head, reading silently. Her eyebrows rose. Oh, she said softly. Oh my. What is it? She looked at me over her glasses. Are you sure you want to know? The question felt like an echo from my mother. But I had come too far to turn back now. The clipping was small, buried between advertisements. For soap and sewing machines. Local merchant severs business ties, the headline read. It described an argument at the family store. My great-great-grandfather's store back then. Apparently, his eldest son, Thomas, had announced his plans to marry a young woman who worked in the mill across town. Her name was not important to the reporter. She was a mill girl. Of humble circumstances. Unsuitable in the eyes of Mr. Hale. The article said harsh words were spoken. It said Thomas was asked to leave the premises permanently. It said he was rumored to have left town later that week with the young woman on a late train. Nothing more. No wedding announcement. No happy photograph. No burial notice. Just the suggestion that he'd walked out of one life and into another that the paper decided wasn't worth following. Families edit themselves, Ellen said gently. Seeing my face. They drop pages they don't like. That's how myths are born. Do myths usually leave a chair at the table? I asked. She smiled sadly. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes that's the only apology they know how to make. Have you ever felt anger for people you've never met? I did. For Thomas, exiled for loving the wrong girl. For the girl, reduced to a job title in a newspaper. But anger is only the beginning of a story, not the end. I drove home with copies of those clippings in my bag. The edges cutting into my palm every time I squeezed too hard. That night, I told your grandfather what I'd found. He listened, his brow furrowed, his thumbs circling the rim of his coffee cup. So the guest was Thomas, he said slowly. The disowned son. Maybe, I said. But the invitation was sent in 1924. The argument happened in 1920. He nodded. So 4 years later, they tried to call him back. Please, Thomas. Come home. The words on that card vibrated in my chest. What happened that night? I asked. Why did they keep the chair empty all these years instead of just saying, we had a son who left? Because maybe that's not the whole story, he said. Maybe someone knows more. Someone did. But she was almost 90. And time was running out. Aunt Rose lived 3 streets over, in a little brick house with ivy climbing up the front. She was the last of that generation. Your great-grandfather's younger sister. Sharp as a pin and stubborn as a weed. When I knocked, she opened the door with her walker braced like a shield. Nora, she said. You look like a woman who found trouble. Maybe I did, I replied. Can I sit? She motioned me in and poured tea into cups so thin. You could almost see right through them. I found Thomas, I blurted. Before fear could tighten my throat. Her hand shook. China rattled in its saucer. No, she whispered. You found his name. You haven't found him. He was your brother, I said. You were a little girl when he left. Aunt Rose, please. I need to understand. She stared at me for a long time. Her eyes were the same pale gray as my father's. But older, clouded with things she wished she'd never seen. What do you think happened? She asked. So I told her. The argument. The mill girl. The exile. The invitation years later. She listened, lips pressed together. And the empty chair, I finished. Every dinner. Every holiday. All my life. The clock on her mantel ticked 5, 6, 7 times before she spoke. You think that chair is for Thomas? She asked. Isn't it? She shook her head, slowly. No, she said. It's not for Thomas. It's for what they did to him when he came back. Have you ever felt the floor tilt, even though you're sitting down? That's what her words did to me. He came back. He came back. The guest had arrived. Memory, when it's that old, comes out in pieces. Like beads slipping off a broken string. Aunt Rose leaned back and closed her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was thin but steady. It was cold that night, she said. I remember because Mama wrapped me in 2 sweaters, even though we were eating inside. She described the house as it had been then. This same house, but younger, with different wallpaper and no crack in the ceiling. The smell of roast beef and onions. The stiff collars on the men's shirts. The way her father kept looking at the clock. Grandfather Hale, I murmured. My great-grandfather. Yes, she said. He'd been different since Thomas left. Harder. Like he'd carved a piece of himself out to match the hole in the family. They had set an extra place at the table that night. Her mother had taken out the best china. The good silver polished until it caught every light. "He's coming home," her mother had whispered in the kitchen. "If we can just get them in the same room, it will be all right. A man can't stay angry forever at his own son. But men can, child. Sometimes they can stay angry until the day they die." They heard the car before they saw it, Aunt Rose went on. The tires on the gravel. The engine, struggling up the hill. Her little fingers had tightened around her napkin. Her heart had pounded. Her big brother, come back. "Did you see him?" I asked, breathless. She nodded. "Yes. He got out of the car in a good coat. Hair combed. Flowers in his hand. He looked nervous. Hopeful. He walked up the front path. He climbed these same 3 steps. He stood at this same door. And then," she whispered. "Papa went to answer it." What do you think happened when the son who'd been cast out stood, hat in hand, on the threshold of the home that had thrown him away? A father's heart can soften in an instant. Or it can harden like stone. According to Aunt Rose. Her father had rehearsed his welcome speech all afternoon in a low, gruff voice. "Thomas," he'd muttered to himself in the pantry. "You're my boy. We don't have to agree. But you're my blood. Come in. Sit down." But fear is louder than love, sometimes. Fear of shame. Fear of gossip. Fear of having to admit you were wrong. When Papa opened the door, Aunt Rose said. He saw Thomas, and behind him, he saw her. The mill girl. No longer just a girl from the wrong side of town. His son's wife now, in all but church papers. She was standing on the path, holding onto the arm of her coat for dear life. She had a little valise. They meant to stay, you see. And in that split second, everything her father had rehearsed dissolved. He did not say, "Come in." He did not say, "Welcome home." He stepped out onto the porch, pulled the door almost closed behind him, and told them, in a voice tight as a drawn wire, to leave. No dinner. No forgiveness. No second chance. Not here, he said. Not with her. Aunt Rose heard it all through the thin wood of the dining room door. Her mother's hand was on her shoulder, trembling. And then? I whispered. Then Papa came back to the table, she said. He sat down in his chair. He picked up his fork. And he said, "We will eat." They ate in silence. Food that tasted like ash. And Thomas? I asked. She shook her head. I didn't see. I was a child. All I remember is the sound of the car going back down the hill. Have you ever heard a door close and realized years later that it was actually a life slamming shut? That was the night of the dinner. The night the guest, in truth, had arrived. And been turned away. What about the empty chair? I asked. Aunt Rose sighed. Your great-grandmother said it every year after that, she said. At first, she said it was in case he came again. She thought maybe, if he saw a place waiting for him, he would forgive us. Forgive Papa. And did he? Did he come back? Her eyes filled with tears that had taken 70 years to gather. The next morning, she whispered. The sheriff came. His car pulled into the driveway at dawn. Her mother's apron was still wet from the night before. Her father was sitting at the table, untouched coffee growing cold. The sheriff took off his hat. When men take off their hats like that, it's never for good news. There's been an accident, he said. The curve on the road to the next town. Black ice in the dark. An old bridge with a rotten rail. Their car had gone through the barrier into the river below. They said Thomas died on impact, Aunt Rose told me. The girl survived for 3 days in the hospital. Her mother had gone to see her, in secret. She'd held the girl's hand, combed her hair with shaking fingers, and listened to her whisper that Thomas had turned the car around. After they were turned away, he said maybe if we gave them time, they'd calm down. The girl breathed. He wanted to come back in the morning. But morning never offered itself. Her father never went to see the bodies. He stayed here, in this house, staring at that empty chair, as if a ghost might sit down any minute and forgive him, without him having to ask. After that, Aunt Rose said, "Mama set that place every holiday, every big family dinner." But it stopped being a welcome. It became a punishment. For him? I asked. For all of us, she replied. We were to remember what happened to those who left. We were to remember what came of disobedience and shame. Papa never said it out loud. But every time he glanced at that empty plate, we heard it. This is what happens when you defy me. Have you ever realized that a tradition you thought was about love was actually built on fear? That's what settled in my chest that night, like a stone. I drove home from Aunt Rose's house with the past sitting heavy in the passenger seat. I came into this dining room, turned on only one lamp, and stood looking at the chair at the far end of the table. The same chair. The same spot. Different dishes, different wallpaper. But the ghost was exactly the same height. "It's you," I whispered. "Thomas. You're the one we've been feeding all these years." With our silence. Then another thought came, colder. We've also been feeding grandfather's warning. How many choices had we not made? Because of a story that was never told but always there? How many loves were turned away at this door, before they even knocked? Families carry their ghosts, Ellen had said at the library. They just give them different names. We had called ours tradition. Over the next few weeks, I became an archivist of my own bloodline. I sat at this table, night after night, sorting through every scrap of paper I could find. In a box at the back of the old buffet, its key long lost and its drawer swollen shut with age, I found the last piece. It was a small tin box, tied with a length of faded blue ribbon. Inside were 3 things. A photograph of Thomas as a boy, standing beside a younger Margaret, my great-grandmother. Both of them squinting into the sun. Wildflowers in their fists. A folded mass card with his name. And a letter in a hand I recognized from recipes and birthday cards. Margaret's. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "My dearest Thomas," it began. In the corner, a date, March 12, 1924. 2 days after the dinner. She wrote of the shock. Of the sheriff's visit. Of the way her husband had not moved from his chair all morning, except to pour himself one drink after another. She wrote of the girl. Her hand in hers at the hospital. She called you Tommy, as if the years had never passed. Margaret wrote. She said you did not blame us, even as your car turned around on that dark road. But the heart of the letter was a confession. "I am the one who made him set that place," she wrote. "I told him that if he would not go to your grave, he would at least face the emptiness he had made. I thought it would humble him. Instead, it hardened him further. He told the children and the neighbors that we left the place out of hope you might still return. He never told them you did return. And that hope was turned away at the door." She begged forgiveness in words that shook on the page. "I could not bring you back, my brother," she wrote. "So I built you a chair. I have said it every year to remind myself never to let pride sit where love should be." In the margin, softer, almost illegible. "If someday a child in this house is brave enough to ask again, tell them the truth. Do not let this chair speak only in half-truths and warnings. Let it speak of you." The letter had never been sent. It had never been read, until that night, by me. Have you ever felt both fury and forgiveness for the dead in the same breath? I did. Fury that they had let this lie twist our family into careful shapes for so long. Forgiveness because, in the end, they had tried to leave a signpost out of the maze. The next family dinner was approaching. Your cousins would be here. Your parents. Everyone with their own children's questions in their pockets. For days, I argued with myself. Was it kinder to let the myth stand? To let the empty chair remain a soft legend? About a guest who never arrived? Or was kindness, after all this time, the same thing as cowardice? What happens to a family when it builds itself on unasked questions? What happens to children when every road that leads away is lined with stories of catastrophe? I thought of my own first love. The boy my parents didn't approve of. The one I'd let go because of a threat spoken in a low, tight voice. We know what happens to those who defy this family, Nora. They hadn't had to say more. I'd seen the empty chair. I'd heard the unspoken story. He left, he died. We stayed, we lived. Now I knew the real story. He was pushed away. They died with words unsaid. And we had lived half alive. Afraid of the very courage Thomas had shown the night he turned his car up this hill. So I made a decision. This dinner, finally, would be different. The day arrived with its familiar choreography. I roasted the meat. I mashed the potatoes. I baked the rolls the way my mother had, with extra butter brushed on top. I ironed the tablecloth. Not the everyday one, but the old one. The one I had found in the attic years before. With the blue embroidery, M&T. I spread it carefully, my fingers smoothing over each letter, as if tucking a child into bed. I set every plate. I folded every napkin. And at the far end, I laid out the place you see now. This time, though, I placed something extra on that plate. The letter. Folded, tied with a small piece of blue ribbon. Resting where a hand should be. Guests arrived. Coats were hung. Kisses landed on cheeks. Laughter filled the hall. You ran around underfoot. Your little hands already reaching for a dinner roll. And when everyone had finally found their seats, the room quieted. They were waiting for grace. Instead, they got a story. I want to talk about this chair, I said. You could feel the old discomfort stir. Like a draft slipping under the door. Your father shifted in his seat. Your aunt looked down at her plate. We all know what we call it, I went on. The place for the dinner guest who never arrived. We've all told some version of that story. A missed train. A storm. A runaway groom. But it's not true. He did arrive. Every head lifted. Every eye found mine. I told them everything. About Thomas. About the mill girl whose name the paper had not bothered to print. But whose hand my great-grandmother had held. About the argument at the store. The invitation. The hope. The knock on the door. The words at the threshold. I read Margaret's letter aloud. My voice unsteady only at the places where she begged for forgiveness from a grave. As I spoke, I watched the faces of my family rearrange themselves. Your father's mouth tightened in anger. Your mother's eyes shone with tears. Your cousins shifted, as if trying on this new family history for size, wondering where it left them. When I finished, the room was so quiet we could hear the clock ticking in the hall. Then your cousin Lily spoke. So you're saying, she whispered, we built a whole tradition on Grandpa's cruelty? Yes, I said. And on great-grandma's guilt. She meant it to be a reminder to love better. But over time, it became something else. A warning. A threat. A story we didn't understand. But obeyed anyway. Does that mean, your father asked slowly, that all those times they told us not to marry wrong? Not to move too far? They were thinking of this? I think so, I said. I think they believed. They were keeping us safe from tragedy. But in truth, they were passing down their own fear. Have you ever watched a spell break? It's not as dramatic as in the movies. There's no flash of light. Just a room of people exhaling the breath they didn't know they'd been holding for generations. Your brother raised his hand. Like he was in school. So what do we do now? He asked. Do we stop setting the chair? The question hung between us. Ending a tradition is its own kind of death. But keeping one that hurts you is like living with a splinter under your skin. I looked at the chair. At the letter. At the faces of everyone at the table. I don't want to erase Thomas, I said. He was here. He loved. He tried to come home. We should remember that. But I do want to end the lie that left us all so afraid of living fully. So what if, I continued slowly, we changed the meaning of this seat? What if it stopped being a punishment and became a promise? A promise of what? You asked. Your young voice bright in the heavy room. A promise, I said, that there will always be a place at this table. For the one who is different. For the one who left. For the one who is late. For the one who is scared to knock. Because they think we will turn them away. We sat with that. You mean, your mother said. If any of our children ever come home with someone we don't expect? Or if they leave for a while, your father added. And think they can't come back? Yes, I said. For them. For us. For anyone who has been turned away by a family like ours. An empty chair, your cousin Lily murmured. Not for absence. But for welcome. Exactly, I said. An empty chair can hold more weight than any memory. We took a vote, of sorts. Not with hands raised. But with nods. With tears wiped away. With shoulders loosening. No one wanted to keep the old story as it was. No one wanted a tradition rooted in fear of fallout. From one long ago dinner. So we did something simple. And yet, in its own way, revolutionary for this house. We spoke Thomas's name aloud. All of us, together. Thomas. The sound of it rolled down the table like a blessing. We said the girl's name, too. Because I had found it in a hospital record. Ellen dug up for me. Sarah. We spoke her name with gentleness. As if we were finally pulling her out. From under that bridge and into the warm light of our remembering. And then, before we passed the potatoes, we made a new rule. From now on, whoever sat in this house and heard this story would know the whole truth. No more half-myth about a guest who never arrived. We would tell our children that once we turned love away at our door. We would tell them we are determined never to do it again. We would keep the chair, but not the shame. We would keep the plate, but not the warning. We would keep the story, but not the silence. Silence is also a story, it just refuses to speak. In the months that followed, something subtle shifted in our family. Your cousin moved across the country for a job that everyone had quietly discouraged before. This time, when we hugged her goodbye on the porch, no one said, "Don't be another one who leaves." We said, "There will always be a place at the table for you." Always. Your brother brought home a girl who was nothing like the ones your grandparents would have picked out of a catalog. Loud laugh, bright hair. Tattoos dancing up her arms like vines. The old story might have turned her into a danger sign. The new story turned her into a guest of honor. One Thanksgiving, your uncle called unexpectedly. He'd been out of touch. Angry. Drifting. I heard about Thomas, he said over the phone. I heard what really happened. Do you? Do you still set that chair? Yes, I said. But now it's for you, too. There was a long pause. Then he said, very softly. I'm coming home, Nora. He walked through that same front door. With his head lowered. Hands stuffed in his pockets. As if he half expected lightning or judgment. Instead, his plate was already waiting. We pulled out the chair. He sat. He wept. We did, too. The old story about the dinner guest who never arrived had kept us from knocking on each other's doors. The new story, Thomas's full story, opened them. You might be wondering, child, what all this has to do with you. You were so small when I first started telling you this fuller version. Today, you're grown. Your own life branching out like a tree from the trunk of this table. Maybe one day, you'll fall in love with someone who makes everyone look twice. Maybe you'll choose a job in a city nobody can pronounce. Or a country no one in this family has ever visited. Maybe you'll come to a crossroads where the safe path curves back toward home, and the wild path leads you over a hill, out of sight. When that day comes, I don't want the ghost of this chair to push you into fear. I want its story to push you into courage. I want you to remember Thomas, who turned his car up this hill, flowers in hand, ready to reconcile. I want you to remember Sarah, shivering in her borrowed coat, willing to face a family that thought her unworthy. And I want you to remember that it was not their love or their leaving that brought tragedy down. It was someone else's pride. We carry that lesson now like a lantern, not like a chain. Sometimes, late at night, when the house has gone quiet, I wander in here and sit across from that empty chair. I pour myself a little tea. I smooth the edge of the old tablecloth. M&T. Still side by side. I think of all the dinners before that fateful one. When Thomas was just a brother. A son. A boy stealing biscuits before they reached the table. I think of all the dinners after. When his name was swallowed. When children like me were hushed. When fear laid down its place setting. And no one dared move it. And I think of this dinner. The one we just shared. You and I. With the lights soft. And the truth laid out between the salt and the pepper. Did it really all change because of one night, you might ask? Yes. Yes, it did. One night when a man chose pride over love. One night when a car turned back down a hill. One night when a chair was set for a guest who would never eat at this table again. But here is the other truth. It can take only one night to begin to change it back. One dinner. One story told fully. One family brave enough to look at its own ghosts and say, we see you. We hear you. We will not let you haunt us the same way anymore. So now, when you see that chair at the end of our table, I hope you don't think only of absence. I hope you think of the way the past can bend the present. And how the present, once it knows the truth, can bend it back. I hope you remember that some of the most powerful things in a family are the stories no one tells out loud. And I hope you tell this one. Tell them that in this house there was once a dinner planned for a son who'd been thrown away. Tell them he came. Tell them he knocked. Tell them he was turned back into the cold. And the road took him away forever. Then tell them how the empty chair stayed. How it whispered half a story into the ears of children for generations. And tell them how, one day, a stubborn granddaughter climbed into an attic, opened a drawer, found a letter, and decided she was done living under shadows. Tell them that's when the story changed. Before we end tonight, I want to ask you something. Is there a chair in your life like this one? Maybe not literally. Maybe it's a subject no one talks about. A person whose photograph is missing from the mantle. A year everyone skips over when they tell their stories. What if, instead of tiptoeing around that silence, you sat down with it? What might you find in the attic of your own heart? I can't promise it will be easy. Our family's truth was not gentle. But it was real. And real is what you can build a life on. If this story has stirred something in you, if you saw a bit of your own family in ours, I'd like to ask a small favor. Take a moment to gently tap that like button, so more people might stumble across this table and sit with us for a while. It helps this old house and this old storyteller keep the lights on here at Dust of Old Days. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, of secrets folded into tablecloths, of love and loss and the ways we carry both, you're welcome to subscribe to Dust of Old Days. There's always room for one more at this table. Always. Tonight, when we clear the dishes, I'll leave that one place just a little longer. Not because I expect Thomas to walk through the door. His road has long since gone where we cannot follow. But because I like to imagine, just for a heartbeat, that somewhere beyond our knowing, he can see this room. He can see the girl whose name is finally spoken. He can see the uncle who came back after years away. He can see you, sitting there with your elbows on my tablecloth, eyes bright, heart open. And maybe he smiles. Not because he was vindicated. Not because we finally felt guilty enough. But because, at last, his story has become what it should have been all along. Not a threat. Not a warning. But a doorway. A doorway we can hold open. For every guest who is late. Or lost. Or scared. Or different. Or simply human. The dinner guest who never arrived. Did, in fact, come to our door. We failed him then. We will not fail the next one. Now eat your potatoes, child, before they get cold. We have a long night of remembering ahead of us. And tomorrow, a new story to live.